I won't lie, ladies and gents, today is not going to be all sunshine and lollipops, but having said that, it's not necessarily a somber occasion either. I think frustrating would be a very good term for what we're about to endure today. Nothing is going to drive you up a wall, but looking at it retrospectively is going to feel like a mosquito bite on your ankle. You know it's there, and you're just trying to ignore it until it goes away. Funnily enough, that's pretty much what happens to Ferrus Manus. You see, everybody forgets about Ferrus, but it's not from a malicious place. He was just around for the least amount of time, and his defining personality traits were both frowning and muttering. When you look at him at face value, it's only natural to overlook the guy. But it's still important to learn about him, because you typically only hear about him from a whisper on the wind. I don't know the inner machinations of your mind, so I'm not going to speak on what you'll enjoy, and I won't pretend to know. But I say we go ahead and give the Gorgon his time of day. Ferrus, even more so than his brothers Rogaldorn or Perturabo, was the strong, silent type in the family. Should he not have met his untimely demise, there's a very real chance he could have usurped the title of the strongest Primarch, but that's a bit of a hard sell, I admit. After all, it's remarkably difficult to keep up in a test of strength when you're competing with a man who completely disregards his own death like Vulcan can. If Ferrus were to have a calling card, a telltale sign that he had been in the area, it would be a wake of shattered earth and bones leading up to his current whereabouts. Not much was known about Ferrus in his early years. Most of his existence was known only through legends or folktales shared between the nomadic tribesmen that dotted his home planet of Medusa. Myths would speak of a cataclysmic impact upon the planet, sundering mountains and leaving lava spewing scars across its surface. Years later, more stories rose to prominence, this time detailing a Goliath emerging from beneath the rubble of a mountain that had seemed the epicenter of the impact that made the world tremble all those years ago. The legends would only continue to grow, to the point where it was impossible to discern exaggeration from reality. Accounts would be delivered far and wide of a hulking figure roaming the landscape, beating anyone or anything that tried to exert its will over him into submission with nothing more than its bare hands. However, there would be no greater epic than the tale of how he gained these so-called iron hands. This was the tale of slaughtering the immortal Necron dragon, Asurnath. For those of you uninformed on the Necrons, they were not only able to kill gods that make the current Chaos gods look like absolute pussies, they were able to outright enslave them. Just a little frame of reference for how good they are with technology. Ferrus would pin this dragon down in a pool of lava as it thrashed its life away trying to escape his grip. This thrashing would result in the metal alloy that the robotic beast was constructed of permanently fusing to Ferrus's body. Fortunately, this material known as necrodermis functions like a living metal. Able to heat up, change shape, and cool down at will, it elevated his smithing proficiency far beyond that of any of his brothers. As luck would have it, you've got a pretty good chance of becoming the best blacksmith that ever lived if you're so strong, unbendable metals are forced to take whatever shape your hands crush them into. Despite this new sensational forging ability, his favorite method of problem solving remained pummeling his issues into oblivion. The unforeseen downside of this was the occasional malady, as Necron technology by design clashes with anything warp-related, and, as we know from our previous videos, the Primarchs at the end of the day are bound together by warp energy. Because of the splicing of the necrodermis and his skin, Ferrus was constantly pestered by unavoidable mood swings, headaches, and other frustrations. It's not like Angron Butcher's nails bad. They weren't crippling so much as they were a series of compounding annoyances. Think of it like having constant back pain coupled with a frequent ringing in your ears. And, well, shit, I know some of you don't even have to imagine that. It just sounds like Tuesday morning for you. As one would expect, nobody was able to go head-to-head with this absolute behemoth of a man. So when he finally decided it was time to claim the mantle of leadership over the planet, the change was immediate. There was no official governing body on Medusa, but an understanding was reached nonetheless amongst everyone who heard of this new chieftain. If he visits, your options are to graciously accept his command, or he's gonna throw you over a fucking mountain range. The only benefit of the latter being you are airborne for so long, there will be plenty of time to repent for all of your past sins before you reach your final destination. Once the entire world was understanding of their new management, Ferrus would take his favorite warriors on expeditions to discover the truth and old secrets he had learned regarding ancient technologies. When it was finally time for the Emperor to gather his son, Ferrus seemed already aware that he was meant for a higher purpose, a purpose he believed this man was meant to show him. As I have recently discussed their friendship in Fulgrim's video, we're only going to do a quick revision of the strongest bond amongst all of the Emperor's sons. Ferrus was generally not a fun guy to be around. Always serious, hard to impress, never enjoying the moment, and always analyzing the situation at hand. There was, however, one man who could break his guard and dredge up his better nature: Fulgrim. A friendship was formed between these two in the relentless pursuits of perfection that defined both of the brothers. The introduction to one another was filled with backhanded compliments, and each would issue a challenge to the other to forge the perfect weapon. They would immediately begin work in the forge, talking shit to one another across its fires for several months until their works were complete. Ferrus had made a brilliant sword. Fulgrim had crafted an exquisite warhammer. Both proclaimed the other as the winner and gifted their weapons to their opponent. If only things could have stayed that pleasant. There's nothing crazy about the legion he received or how he conducted himself around them. They were incredibly efficient and didn't really do anything out of the ordinary. The crazy with them comes into play later after his death. Upon finding them, he issued a full restructuring of the legion. Strangely enough, he actually had some of his space marines go back and live on Medusa to lead the clans in efforts to make them stronger. They were given specific instructions not to make the living conditions better in order to foster a hardier people. Yes, that sounds like it absolutely fucking sucks, because it does, but if you want to make space marines, that's kind of the best way to do it. Whereas the benefit was the Legion becoming incredibly centered around the ideal of survival of the fittest, there's going to be some negatives we're going to discuss afterwards. You see, the issue with making a very effective, albeit ruthless fighting force is that they are a very effective, ruthless fighting force. These are the loyalists that do not give a singular fuck about stepping on a few 100,000 normal humans in order to get a job done. It's just sort of generally accepted that they're dicks. The only hatred they have in their heart is for the weak and their enemies. They don't make the sacrifices out of malice, they simply see it as the most sensible option available. If the enemies are surrounded by humans, and your job is to kill the enemy, it's more efficient to decimate the entire area than sitting there and parsing through everybody. Cementing themselves with a foundation of logical and technical superiority, when you hear bad things about the Empire in its early years relating to things like tyranny, that was usually the Iron Hands. If they said surrender and someone said no, there were no further negotiations. Because of their upbringing, these boys had a mean streak a mile long and were always on the lookout for a way to empty that rage into something. If you said that magical one-syllable word, you are now the enemy, and it is time for absolute war. Your capital city will be reduced to rubble. Civilians will be killed because they are assumed sympathizers. No quarter will be given apart from that of a swift death. When you fight with the Iron Hands, you might as well just stand out in the open so they can put a bolter round right through your chest instead of letting you die under a pile of rubble because your fate's determined and there's no need to waste a bullet on mercy. Honestly, I'm giving you this information now so the next part doesn't hit as hard. In the Dropsite Massacre at Istvan V, the first battle in the Civil War to come, Ferrus would die and his legion almost went with him. This moment is often written off and considered a waste of a character that could have been so much more. I understand that sentiment because I admittedly shared it for quite some time. But the more I've sat and thought it over, the more meaning it has to me. When Ferrus died, it set a precedent for the future. A Primarch up until this point was effectively a god in human form. They had been seen as invincible. This defining moment proved, after all the feats, all the grandstanding, all the glory, they can be dragged down to the same level of a mere guardsman. This was the moment we were shown that a Primarch could die. Sure, they had petty arguments and bickering amongst their family, as we all do, but it was this moment which truly established their humanity. Do I think they could have done it better? Absolutely. I don't doubt that for a second. but I do think this moment is greatly undervalued for what it is. Now I have to bring up his legion's current state of affairs before we can get into the fun speculation portion, because oh boy, is it fun. It's been like over 10,000 years, maybe even 20,000, I'm bad at time, but these boys miss their dads so goddamn much. They view emotions as the reason that Ferrus had been killed, which is true at face value, but they did not recover this fumble well. They thought the proper way to prevent this happening in the future was remove any and all possible emotion from their legion. They would maintain this cold and calculating nature for quite some time until they realized, oh my god, it was the rage inside of us that was the gas in the engine. That's why we were so efficient. And now they're slowly starting to revert back to the way that they were when they were better. But there's a bigger issue at hand. They really clung to this phrase, the flesh is weak, and decided to go balls to the wall, cybernetically augmenting themselves. Problem with that being, it's not the full saying. The full saying is, the flesh is weak, but deeds endure. Translating to the 21st century, hey jackass, you're gonna die, I'm gonna die, we're all gonna die sooner or later. It's what we do in this life that matters. Not, hey, try to become an invincible cyborg because human beings are weak and you should be mean to them. Just so you know, if Ferrus were still around right now, he would be livid. His arms were helpful when they were helpful, but he still would have preferred normal arms. Now, you're allowed to go ahead and replace an arm with a robotic limb if it gets cut off in battle. That's perfectly fine, but motherfucker, don't cut it off yourself. Despite returning to a state where emotions are generally accepted and they're kind of getting a little more based in their roots, they're still cutting their goddamn limbs off, and you gotta give them a couple points off for that. The only other thing we know about him is a potential link between the Legion of the Damned. It is not confirmed by any means. Hell, it's outright denied. Most of it was people taking an idea and running with it. But I want to talk about it, so we're gonna talk about it. Ferrus making a return, albeit as a revenant of sorts, is a thing that definitely happened, but it was likely not with the Legion of the Damned. It was likely with his dead troops from Istvan, and it was just a split second. He's not back. However, there has been expressed interest in that being a possibility, so we're going to feed our delusions here. The Legion of the Damned are often considered the Ghost Rider Legion to the casual observer. If you take one look at them, you will totally understand why. Personally, I think a better comparison would be the Davy Jones crew from Pirates of the Caribbean. They emerge on a battlefield with pinpoint precision out of portals described as raging infernos, always at the most crucial point in a battle, not a second before or after. Any attacks directed unto them have no effect, simply passing through the blazing giants. As they coalesce upon the enemy, the screams of the damned are throttled and buried beneath the sounds of gunfire, chain blades, and the ignition of flamethrowers. And then they leave, disappearing back into the nothingness that they came out of. No words shared, only smoldering bodies left behind. An inexplicable amnesia-like effect then takes hold on everyone who has seen this legion in action, having no memory of it mere days later. Ain't that fucking neat? Well, that's the rather short story of Ferrus Manus, made as long and interesting as I possibly could. Now, I don't expect him to skyrocket into your top 5. Hell, I honestly don't expect him to clear your top 10. I just wanted more people to understand the impact that he truly had upon the landscape. He wasn't the slouch that folks often make him to be just because of his abrupt ending. After all, both Guilliman and Horus had no problem openly admitting a joint effort with Ferrus could pulverize any opponent before them. Somehow it becomes a footnote, but he was always a motherfucker of a general at the end of the day. If you made it this long, thank you for giving me, and more specifically Ferrus, a bit of your time. Lord knows he's starved of the attention. And that should about wrap us up here today. I think I've given you enough information over this series to finally break open the Evil Twins next round, and oh, well, that's going to be a lot. But once again, thank you very much. Have a good night.